All right, we are going to draw the eye today. Go ahead and plot in the width line. So I'm just dragging my pencil down. I'm plotting in, kind of eyeballing the width. Then we want the height of the eye, just to include the part that includes the white of the eye and the iris. We'll add the eyelid later. And this is why we're starting with proportion lines first, rather than just drawing a contour line. All right, so now that we have this general shape, we're going to recreate the shape of this eye. A lot of people draw eyes like a football shape, but if you notice where the tear duct is, it kind of dips out, so we're going to try to recreate that. So go ahead and very lightly, that way you can erase if you make any mistakes, go ahead and draw the shape of the eye, not to include the eyelids. And rather than drawing exactly what I'm drawing, reference the image. I'm showing you the steps, but I am not perfect. So your work will turn out much better if you copy the same reference image as me rather than drawing exactly what I'm drawing. Once you have the shape of the eye and you like how it looks, then you can erase the lines that we originally plotted for the width and the height. Try to adjust this so you guys can see more of the sheet. All right, our next step, I like to draw in part of the shape of the tear duct. We aren't going to shade it yet. Right now we're just working on contour lines and making sure everything is placed appropriately before we add value. Remember, it's much easier to erase a line rather than an entire shape filled with values. And now we're going to add the shape of the iris. Notice, in this photo, the iris does not touch the bottom eyelid. So it's not going to be a circle. Part of the top of the iris is covered by the eyelid. And remember, we're enlarging this beyond a realistic size of an eye. So it's okay if it looks really large, because it is really large. Again, draw very lightly in the event that you need to erase. Eyes are my favorite thing to draw starting out with a portrait. I feel once I've recreated realistic eyes, then I can move on to the rest of the facial features. If you're worried about making one eye on your summited portrait, if you're worried about making one eye looking really realistic and the other not so much, I recommend drawing the same steps at the same time between the two eyes and just kind of going back and forth. Bless you. That way they're consistent. So the next thing we're going to do is add the pupil. Do not fill this in, resist the urge to fill in the pupil, because we're also going to add that highlight in a moment. And so I like to just mimic the outer curve as I add in the pupil, so it also looks like a circle. Probably make it a little bit larger and referencing how far the pupil is down into the iris. And highlights are the thing that's going to make this look realistic, like a real eye versus just a drawing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw just the shape of this. And we can always erase if you end up filling in your highlight. Does not have to look perfect. I'm going to draw a similar shape. Is this pace okay? You can answer the question. Kelly, good pace? Huh? Is the pace okay? All right. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is add the shape of this eyelid. Notice it is a bit wide. It kind of tapers out. So I'm going to go maybe this far up. So another thing about drawing faces or people in general is first I'm going to put all the proportions in, all the contours, and then we will shade the skin and the eyes. We put the hair on very, very last. So it's going to look a little funny until we get eyebrows on this eye and eyelashes, but we want to put those on last because we don't want to blend those into one giant blob or mess. Okay, and then I'm going to taper this out. And then we're going to do a similar thing to the eyelash line below the eyelid. On the bottom eyelid, I'm going to plot this line in. Notice we're going to shade this, and then the eyelid line is going to kind of soften. But I'm going to still plot that in so we know where to put the eyelashes. Yes. You can move to that spot at the first table if you want. Oh, that's fine. Yeah. There or there. All right. And then rather than filling in the eyebrow, similar thing, we're just going to plot in the baseline first. So it extends beyond the left portion of the eye, and it's going to go past the eye on the right side. And if you want, you can kind of plot in some of the other lines, but I don't want an outline. Otherwise, the eyebrow is just going to look drawn on, right? So once we've reached this part, we're going to start shading. You're going to use something much smaller than this the next time we meet. We're going to use something called a tortillon. This one is a blending stump, and they're essentially just rolled paper, tightly rolled, and they do a great job of smudging things. But we're going to start with cotton swabs today because this is practice. When you move on to your final summative piece, you'll have thicker paper, and everyone will have their own little tortillon. Okay? So let's go ahead and start with the white of the eye. So what I'm going to do, even though your eyelids just stick out slightly from your eye, they cast a small shadow. So go ahead and start shading in a little bit under the eyelid. And if you remember from first semester, if you're shading a sphere, you want your pencil strokes to mimic that curve. And then when you blend, so I'm going to go back over it with the cotton swab, when you blend, you also want your pencil or your blending strokes to mimic that curve. And you want your pencil to be sharpest when you're working on all the little details, especially when we get to the eyelashes and eyebrow. Then we're going to move on to the left side. So you'll notice with the tear duct, we'll shade the tear duct in just a moment, but to the right of the tear duct, it's a little bit darker, and it'll kind of fade in. So I'm going to plot in some of those darker values. And even though we call them the white of the eyes, we do a bit of shading for it. The only place that's going to be pure white, what do you think that is? What part on this image is pure white?
The reflection.
Yeah, the reflection, the highlight. Excellent. Just take that cotton swab, kind of drag some of those values. And as the cotton swab, as we start using that more, it's going to start getting a bit dingy, and that's actually perfect for some of these lighter values. Because you can create softer strokes with the cotton swab than you can your pencil. And if you need to very lightly outline things as you smudge, after you smudge them, you can go back in and add little details. Like I see that next to the white of the eyes and the eyelid, there's this really thin line. So I'm just going to kind of plot that in. All right, and the next thing we're going to do is the tear duct. The tear duct, I know this image isn't perfectly clear, but we see quite a few shifts in value. So I'm going to go ahead and plot in some of those darker values and just recreate some of those lines the best you can. It is much darker than the white of the eye. And because it is the tear duct, there are some nice highlights in there as well. Then you can always go back in and erase. Those highlights are just going to make it look kind of glossy, because no one's eyes are so dry that they don't reflect light. And then as I'm looking, it looks like this area should be just a touch darker, so I'm going to put that in. I personally like to fill in the pupil right away. However, we're going to refrain from doing that, because if you were to, if you've ever tried to draw something perfectly symmetrical and it gets bigger and bigger as you try to make it perfect or perfectly round, we don't want the pupil to end up, oversized because of any mistakes. So we're going to start shading the ridge of the iris. Notice it's not perfectly, it's not super sharp, it's kind of fuzzy. Just going to very lightly place in some of these darker values. It's kind of dark right up here. Plot that in. Remember, if you smudge over your highlight on accident, that's okay. We can put that back in later. Kind of work to smudge this. I think the eyes take the longest whenever you're drawing a portrait, just because you want them to look the most realistic or recognizable, because most people give eye contact when they're looking at someone, right? So we spend a lot of time looking at eyes. And if those look nice and solid, then everything falls into place. Also, with the portraits you choose, since you're going to be drawing someone straight on, you're not going to see much of the ear. So you have to focus more on making the eyes look like a perfect pair, whereas there's just one nose, one mouth, and yes, there are two ears, but like I said, you're not going to see much from the perspective that you're drawing the eye from, or the face from. All right, so now what I'm going to do is just start plotting in some more of these values. Notice it's darker around the pupil. There's some lighter areas. It kind of radiates out. I'm not putting any fine lines in. A lot of people just want to make like these sun ray type lines. And then after you feel like you've at least got the base layer of those values for the iris, you can start filling in the pupil. So I have some base values in, I'm going to fill in the pupil, and then I'm going to start adding in the remaining details. So for the pupil, like I said, we're just using your regular pencil today, but next time, whenever you're drawing your actual portrait, you are welcome to use the 6B and 4B pencils that are going to get you the really dark value. So I'm kind of applying my pencil strokes in a circular motion so it's not all scratchy in our darkest area. I'm just going to blend that to make sure it's nice and smooth. Is this pace okay? Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go back in. I'm just going to keep layering a few values and lines. So that we can recreate this texture. Also, you'll notice I don't want you to put any of these eyelash details in. However, you'll notice in the reflection, it's not pure white. There are some really tiny eyelash reflection lines. You can put those in the highlight if you would like. So we're just going to spend a few minutes touching this up. We can always come back to it after we shade everything else. And notice the eyelash reflection. Those lines curve in. Eyelashes don't stick straight out, so they're going to be slightly curved lines. And the portraits you draw are smaller. Your full portrait will be similar to an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, or at largest will be 9 by 12. So the eyes are going to be smaller, but I find that it's better to practice on something that's enlarged so you understand how to add all the details before you draw something extremely, well, not extremely small, but much smaller. All right. So now we're going to start adding the skin tone. So what we're going to do is plot in some of these darker values first. Remember, the cotton swab is going to help you out. And then whenever you're doing this for your big portrait, you can use paper towels as well to help you out for a larger surface area. All right, so what I'm going to do, you'll see this is darker under here, so I'm going to start just using the edge of my pencil. Go along the lid, follow that curve. And then if at any time you need a new cotton swab, feel free to grab one. I have plenty. So when I'm blending those pencil strokes, again, you're going to follow the curve of that eyelid. I'm going to grab a cotton swab. If you need to sharpen your pencil at all, go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm going to extend this above the eye as well. Even though we're going to add an eyebrow, we want it to be shaded underneath. If you don't do any value or shading below the eyebrow line, so if you don't add skin, same with your head whenever you draw a portrait, if you don't add any value and it's just white, it's going to look kind of like a balding Barbie doll. And we do not want that, right? Unless you're drawing a balding Barbie doll. All right, so what we're going to do is extend this up. I'm not filling in the eyebrow, but I am going to make that area a bit darker just to help us out later on. After you add skin underneath the eyebrow, if you need to plot your lines back in, that's totally fine. The reason we add skin to this is you are going to have to draw skin on your portrait, right? And if you don't learn to add value around the facial feature, it's just going to look like you drew perfect little facial features and cut them out and put them on a face-shaped drawing. I'm just going to plot in the shape, general shape of my eyebrow again. Then I'm noticing like my eyelid is a little too bright, so I can go back in and darken things as I go. Right, so now we're going to focus on below the eye, so the eyelid and your under eye. So we need a little value along this ridge. And then below that as well. kind of touch things up as we go. And I find that it's easier to work from, if you're working in grayscale, work with a portrait that's also in grayscale, so you don't have to worry about converting some of those values. Looks like it leans a little bit more. Just darken that area. All right, so before we add eyelashes, I want to show you some things, and you can practice anywhere on your sheet of paper. But rather than, if this is our eye, shape of our eye, right? Rather than doing this, where you draw lines straight out, yes, it radiates kind of around that line of the eye, your eyelashes, you want a nice fine point, they're going to curve, and they typically are grouped together. They kind of clump together. So you need to make sure you're following whatever curve there is. So like underneath the eye, it's going to be very delicate, faint lines. You don't want too few eyelashes where it looks like there's only a few. And it's a, I don't know, I've never seen a bald eye, but we'll go with a bald eye. And then you don't want so many that they look fake. Okay? Don't make them too long. They shouldn't commandeer the eyelid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the left and work my way right. I have a nice sharp pencil, and I'm just going to do faint little strokes. They're kind of grouped together. And the ones over here. And some of them go beyond the eyelid. Okay, and then underneath the eye, they're going to be very faint as well. And I'm just going to go back over and kind of soften the line where they are, just where they start growing from. even if you've gone to a place and you think it's completely done, just check the value, see if you need to make anything darker or lighter. You guys need a couple more minutes. Are you ready to move on to the eyebrow? How many of you are ready to move on to the eyebrow? Handful. Okay, we'll give it another minute and then we'll do the eyebrow. All right, let's go ahead, start shading the eyebrow. Same thing, you'll notice most of these are out of focus though. You want to do the random little stray eyebrow hairs as well though, so it looks realistic. Make sure your pencil is sharp, bless you. I'm going to just start plotting some hairs in. They grow in this direction. These lines kind of grow from here. Since this is a little blurry on the left side, I can put some darker values in there. before you finish, if there are any areas where you need to erase highlights, you can do that. If there's any areas you need to touch up and not outline, but maybe make lines crisp, more crisp, you can do that. Make sure there is some skin above the eyebrow. We're not working with a complete face, but we just want to make sure there is skin around all sides so it looks like it's sitting on a face. And with the amount of time that is left in class, I think we might stick with the nose, because the nose, although it's a bit tricky, I don't think it takes as long as drawing the mouth. I'm going to stop right there, pause the video, and I'm going to hand back